The heavy oak gavel slammed down against the wooden bench like a gunshot. The sound echoed through the suffocating heat of the packed courtroom, sealing Sarah's fate. Every eye in the room pinned her to the spot, dripping with pure malice. The mayor's wife leaned forward from the front row, a cruel, mocking sneer twisting her face. She pointed a gloved finger at Sarah's large, full-figured frame, laughing just loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. A heavy, suffocating maid's dress clung tightly to Sarah's full hips and generous curves, a garment she had outgrown but could never afford to replace. The wealthy women of the town whispered behind their lace fans, their eyes tracking the way the fabric strained against her soft, heavy shoulders. They called her a thief, but their eyes spoke of a deeper disgust for her size, her poverty, and her sheer existence. On the judge's table lay a glittering diamond necklace, its stones catching the dim lanterns of the courtroom.
The mayor claimed it had been found hidden deep inside Sarah's small, rented mattress, wrapped in a rag. Sarah clutched the rough fabric of her skirt, her knuckles turning stark white as her chest heaved. A single tear cut a clean path through the gray dust on her flushed cheek, but she refused to let out a sob. She stood 5 feet 8 inches of lush, heavy curves, a woman built for the hard frontier, yet made to feel like a monster by the frail elite. The corrupt judge leaned over his podium, his eyes cold, narrow, and entirely bought by the mayor's gold. He declared that a woman of her massive, unsightly stature and low birth belonged in heavy iron chains, exiled to the state prison. The bailiff stepped forward, his heavy iron shackles clinking together with a cold metallic ring that promised total ruin. Sarah looked down at her trembling hands, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had no money, no family, and no one in this God-forsaken territory to speak for a poor, plus-size maid. Suddenly, a massive boom rattled the entire building, vibrating through the floorboards and deep into Sarah's chest. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom didn't just open, they flew off their hinges, splintering against the stone walls. A thick cloud of Texas dust swirled into the courtroom, silhouetting a towering, broad-shouldered figure standing in the wreckage. He wore a low-slung black Stetson, a dark leather duster that brushed his spurs, and a grim, unyielding expression carved from granite. It was Silas Vance, the richest, most ruthless rancher in the entire territory, a man whose name made even the governor tremble in his boots. Silas stepped through the dust, his heavy boots thudding against the floorboards with absolute, terrifying authority. He didn't look at the judge, and he didn't look at the trembling mayor. His piercing, dark eyes locked directly onto Sarah, sweeping over her full, trembling figure with an intense, unreadable gaze. The entire courtroom went dead silent, the air turning ice cold as the grim cowboy marched toward the front. Before we reveal the shocking words he whispered that changed her life forever, take a moment to join our Frontier family. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a single moment of this breathtaking story. Silas Vance walked with a slow, deliberate stride that made the floorboards groan beneath his weight. The heavy silver spurs on his boots clicked against the wood, a rhythmic sound that felt like a countdown to doom for everyone in the room. He stopped right beside Sarah, his massive frame towering over her, shielding her from the glaring eyes of the town. Sarah could smell the scent of leather, tobacco, and the crisp winter air of the high plains radiating from his duster. She held her breath, staring up at his sharp jawline, which was covered in a thick, dark stubble. Silas didn't say a word to her at first. He simply turned his gaze toward the judge's bench, his eyes like 2 pieces of flint. The corrupt judge swallowed hard, his hand trembling slightly as he clutched his gavel, losing all his false bravado. The mayor shifted uncomfortably in his front row seat, pulling at the tight collar of his expensive, imported suit. Sarah looked down, waiting for Silas to join in on the mockery, expecting him to order her removal just like the rest of them. Instead, Silas reached into the inner pocket of his leather coat and pulled out a thick bundle of official documents.
The papers were bound by a heavy, red wax seal bearing the official crest of the federal government in Washington. He slammed the bundle down onto the judge's desk with a force that made the inkwells rattle and skip. The judge flinched, staring at the documents as if they were a coiled rattlesnake ready to strike. Silas leaned over the bench, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the very walls of the building. He told the judge to open the papers and read the names aloud, or he would personally hang the entire town council from the nearest oak tree. The judge's hands shook violently as he broke the wax seal, unfolding the crisp parchment pages. The courtroom remained so quiet that the frantic scratching of the judge's spectacles against his nose sounded incredibly loud. As the judge read the words, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He looked up from the paper, his eyes darting frantically between the mayor and Sarah's heavy, trembling form. The mayor stood up, demandingly asking what the meaning of this interruption was, his voice cracking with sudden panic. Silas slowly turned his head toward the mayor, a dark, dangerous smile touching the corner of his lips. He stated that the diamond necklace on the table never belonged to the mayor's wife, nor was it ever stolen by a maid. He revealed that the necklace was listed in the Federal Registry as the personal property of Abigail Sterling, Sarah's deceased mother. The crowd gasped, a wave of shocked whispers washing through the rows of wooden benches like a sudden wind. The mayor's wife gripped her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white, her face twisting in sudden terror. Silas stepped closer to the mayor, pointing a leather-gloved finger directly at the man's chest. He announced to the entire room that Sarah was not a penniless servant, but the sole legal heir to the largest gold mines in the Northern Territory. He explained how the mayor had forged the land deeds 10 years ago, leaving a young, grieving girl to starve while he grew rich off her blood.
Sarah listened, her mind spinning so fast she felt the room tilt beneath her worn, battered boots. She remembered her mother's beautiful face, the sudden poverty that followed her death, and the endless years of scrubbing floors for the very people who ruined her. The mayor screamed that it was a lie, calling Sarah a fat, worthless peasant who didn't deserve a single cent. Silas didn't hesitate. His fist shot out like a lightning bolt, striking the mayor squarely in the jaw. The heavy crack of bone echoed through the room as the mayor flew backward, crashing into the wooden benches in a heap of groans. The townspeople shrieked, scrambling away from the fallen man as Silas turned his back on him, completely dismissed. Silas walked back to Sarah, his expression softening just a fraction as he looked down at her beautiful, full face. He reached out with his large, rough hand and gently wiped the stray tear from her dusty cheek with his thumb.
He whispered to her that her days of hiding in the shadows of this miserable town were officially over. Before anyone could speak, Silas reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a massive, heavy gold ring set with a flawless emerald. He took Sarah's soft, thick hand in his own, ignoring the way she tried to pull back out of sheer habit and shame. He slid the ring firmly onto her finger, the gold gleaming brightly against her skin, fitting her perfectly. Silas announced to the stunned courtroom that Sarah was now his lady, and anyone who looked at her wrong would answer to his Winchester rifle. Without waiting for a reply, he slipped one powerful arm behind her knees and the other around her full, soft waist. He lifted her off her feet in one effortless, sweeping motion, cradle-carrying her heavy, voluptuous body against his broad chest. Sarah gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his thick neck, feeling the immense strength in his shoulders. For the first time in her life, her weight didn't feel like a burden or a curse. It felt entirely cherished and protected. Silas marched out of the shattered courtroom, carrying his new bride past the staring, terrified citizens of the town. Outside, a magnificent black carriage pulled by 4 massive stallions waited in the swirling dust, ready to take them away. He placed her gently onto the plush velvet seat inside, stepping in behind her and closing the heavy door on the town forever. The carriage surged forward, leaving the corrupt valley behind as they climbed toward the safety of his massive mountain ranch. The black carriage rolled past the massive stone pillars marking the entrance to the Vance Empire, leaving the dust of the hateful town far behind. Sarah looked out the tinted glass window, her fingers tracing the smooth, heavy gold of the emerald ring on her finger. The carriage pulled up to a breathtaking three-story manor, built of dark timber and river rock, surrounded by towering pine trees. Silas stepped out first, offering his large, gloved hand to help her down onto the solid, clean ground. He didn't rush her. He waited patiently as her heavy, full figure stepped out of the carriage, his eyes admiring every inch of her. Two elderly, kind-faced housekeepers stood by the grand double doors, bowing their heads respectfully as Silas introduced Sarah as the new mistress of the ranch. Sarah felt a flush creep up her neck, unused to anyone showing her a shred of respect, let alone treating her like royalty. Silas led her inside to a grand dining hall where a massive, roaring fireplace filled the room with warmth and the scent of cedar. A feast fit for a king was laid out on the long mahogany table. Roasted meats, fresh bread, and rich, thick gravies. Sarah's stomach growled loudly, a reminder of the systematic starvation she had endured while surviving on the town's meager scraps. Silas pulled out a heavy timber chair for her, his large hands resting gently on her soft, thick shoulders as she sat down. He sat directly across from her, pouring her a glass of sweet wine and telling her to eat until she was completely satisfied. For the first time in her life, Sarah ate without shame, savoring the rich food while Silas watched her with a quiet, intense satisfaction. The next morning, a sharp knock on the manor's front door broke the early silence of the valley. Silas opened it to find the town's wealthiest banker standing on the porch, his face pale and dripping with nervous sweat. The banker held a ledger, frantically explaining that the mayor's sudden downfall had caused a massive financial panic in the valley. Silas smiled a cold, ruthless smile, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door slightly behind him. He reached into his desk and produced a stack of legal documents, showing that he had already bought up every single one of the mayor's outstanding debts. He told the banker that by sunset he would own the mayor's house, the town hall, and every business that had ever turned Sarah away. Silas intended to completely squeeze the corrupt officials until they had nothing left but the clothes on their backs. While Silas handled the town's ruin, 3 premium seamstresses arrived at the ranch from the capital, carrying bolts of the finest silk and velvet. They had been personally ordered by Silas to create an entirely new wardrobe exclusively for Sarah's lush, full frame. Sarah stood nervously in the center of the grand bedroom as the women unrolled deep emerald green silks and midnight blue velvets. One of the younger seamstresses sighed, commenting that they usually made dresses for the frail, thin ladies of the city. Silas stepped into the room at that exact moment, his dark eyes flashing with a sudden, dangerous intensity. He walked up to the seamstress, his voice a low, terrifying growl that made the woman instantly drop her measuring tape. He told her that he didn't care about the frail women of the city. He wanted dresses made to celebrate every single curve of his wife's beautiful body. He ordered them to use the finest fabrics to accent her full hips, her soft, heavy shoulders, and her proud stature. The seamstresses worked through the day, cutting and sewing with absolute precision under the cowboy's watchful eye. That evening, Sarah stepped out from behind the dressing screen, wearing a heavy, custom-tailored emerald silk gown. The corset was designed perfectly to embrace her voluptuous figure, lifting her chest and flowing elegantly over her wide, full hips. The rich fabric caught the golden light of the fireplace, making her look absolutely radiant, like a true queen of the frontier. Silas stood frozen by the window, his breath catching in his throat as his eyes raked over her stunning transformation. He walked over to her, his heavy boots silent on the plush rug, and placed his large hands on her narrow waist. He looked deeply into her eyes, whispering that she was the most beautiful, breathtaking sight he had ever seen in his entire life. Sarah looked into the full-length mirror, her eyes filling with tears of joy as she finally saw herself through his eyes, loved, desired,
and completely safe. The peace of the ranch was shattered late that night by the frantic barking of the guard dogs near the stables. Silas instantly reached for his Winchester rifle resting against the wall, his face turning into a mask of pure steel. He looked at Sarah, whispering for her to stay deep inside the bedroom and bolt the heavy oak door behind him. Outside, a dozen shadows moved through the thick pine trees, torches casting a flickering, ominous orange glow against the snow. It was the ruined mayor, his face bruised and desperate, leading a gang of lawless mercenaries he had hired with his last remaining gold. They carried rifles and jars of kerosene, determined to burn the ranch to the ground and destroy the Washington deeds. The mayor screamed into the night, demanding Silas give up the plus-size witch so they could drag her back to the gallows. Before the mercenaries could take another step, a shot ripped through the darkness, shattering the lantern in the mayor's hand. Silas stepped out onto the wide stone porch, his rifle cocked and resting firmly against his broad shoulder. He didn't yell. He simply began firing with a cold, terrifying precision that dropped the frontline mercenaries into the dirt. The hired guns panicked, realizing too late they had marched into the lair of the territory's most ruthless killer. From the upstairs window, Sarah watched the muzzle flashes light up the night, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and awe. She saw one mercenary sneak around the side of the porch, raising his pistol directly toward Silas's unprotected back. Without a second thought, Sarah grabbed a heavy brass candelabra from the nightstand and threw open the window. She leaned her full, heavy frame over the sill and hurled the heavy metal object with all her might, striking the attacker squarely in the head. The man groaned and collapsed into the snow, his gun discharging harmlessly into the freezing night air. Silas spun around, seeing the fallen attacker, then looked up at Sarah, a dark, fiercely proud smile flashing across his face. He turned back to the remaining men, his rifle barking 3 more times, until the remaining mercenaries threw down their weapons and fled into the dark. Only the mayor was left, bleeding and trembling on his knees in the red-stained snow as Silas walked down the steps. Silas stood over him, the hot barrel of his rifle pressing firmly against the mayor's sweating forehead.
He told the pathetic man that frontier justice was swift and that his life now belonged to the woman he had tried to destroy. Silas dragged the groaning mayor by his collar into the grand hall, throwing him down onto the floorboards like a sack of grain. Sarah descended the spiral staircase, her emerald silk gown rustling softly, looking every bit like the sovereign ruler of the territory. Silas handed her a pen and a new stack of legal deeds, telling her that the mayor's entire estate now required her final signature to be liquidated. The mayor begged for mercy, looking up at Sarah's full, imposing figure with absolute, shaking terror. Sarah didn't hesitate. She signed her name with a sharp, elegant stroke, officially stripping the corrupt elite of every single cent they possessed. Silas called his men to haul the broken man away to the federal marshals, ensuring he would spend the rest of his miserable days in a dark stone cell. He walked back to Sarah, wrapping his powerful arms around her lush waist and pulling her soft, voluptuous body tightly against his chest. He kissed her deeply, vowing that his guns and his wealth would always stand as an unbreakable wall between her and the cruelty of the world. The morning sun broke over the high peaks of the territory, flooding the valley with a brilliant golden light. A fleet of expensive carriages lined the main street of the town, bringing the wealthiest and most influential figures from across the state. Even the governor had arrived, sitting nervously in the front row of the newly renovated town square. The entire community gathered in a tense, breathless silence, waiting for the arrival of the ranch's new sovereigns. The heavy doors of the grand black carriage opened, and Silas Vance stepped out, his dark duster catching the mountain breeze. He turned and offered his strong, leather-gloved hand to the woman inside, his eyes filled with absolute pride.
Sarah stepped out onto the wooden platform, and a collective gasp rippled through the massive crowd. She wore a breathtaking, custom-tailored, royal blue velvet gown, that hugged her voluptuous figure with flawless perfection. The rich fabric accentuated her beautiful, heavy curves, flowing elegantly over her wide hips and showcasing her proud, full frame. She looked absolutely radiant, a striking contrast to the pale, thin elite who had once looked down on her from their high horses. Silas led her to the center of the pavilion, his arm wrapped securely around her soft, narrow waist for everyone to see. He cleared his throat, his deep, gravelly voice carrying across the entire square like thunder rolling over the plains. He announced to the territory that Sarah was not only his wife, but the sole owner of the vast gold reserves beneath their feet. The very people who had whispered cruel names and mocked her size now bowed their heads, desperate to win her favor.
Sarah looked out at the sea of faces, no longer a helpless maid swallowing her tears, but the true queen of the frontier. She had found a love that didn't just accept her curves, but worshiped them, and a protector who would never let her feel small again. What would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you forgive the townspeople who wronged you? Or would you use your new wealth to make them pay for every insult? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends.